from an international standpoint, if you've never had the opportunity to travel, it's just these meetings happen anywhere and everywhere. And for speaking for myself personally, from an academic standpoint, we have research symposiums or research conferences all over the world. If you're fortunate enough to travel, it's very possible you can do that. And some of them are massive, and only massive in Frankfurt or London or Dubai or wherever it is. Location is everything. You can have some exotic events at some very hard to reach places, which is going to cost you a lot more money. I have a relative that has been in the sales business forever, and I think with some of these companies, and back in the day, a lot of pharmaceutical companies, it was how unique can we make our event from a location standpoint, and when we understand that money's no object. And back in the heyday, which is not to say it still doesn't happen now, but back in the heyday, it was definitely trying to one-up each other because of the sheer amount of money that was being made. So, again, I just talked about Germany, and almost half of the exhibitors are not from Europe, which is crazy, which is really pretty cool. So, depending on what you're going to do, you have an American company. You understand that there may be a demand for your product outside the United States. It's an untapped market, and maybe you starting to realize the potential. This may be a great idea for you to go in and be an exhibitor for, not to get specific because we don't know what your product is, but for your product overseas to introduce it to a completely different market. Some of those companies, if you've never heard of them, you may eventually. So again, fashion in Italy, that makes sense if you know anything about fashion, right? The UK we kind of talked about. Just some examples of events that happen there. 450 venues is a lot. 17 million visitors. So I could say, if your company wanted you to go to a trade show in Italy, there's worse things that you could do. But again, cost-benefit analysis. As an attendee, as a vendor, as someone who's trying to launch a product, you're weighing all these things out. Is it worth it? Some other places to look at, and like we said, for the European Union, as it shifts and changes, what's important. When we talk about technology, consumer electronics, food, you look at 2 leaders. Of course, CES for us in the U.S. would be the biggest version that we have. And I think it's important to look at Singapore and understand the government's involved in promoting that. That's good because you have funding from your government to really showcase your area. And some places, in Singapore is a good example of realizing the benefit of hosting events, large events, showcasing not only the area, but, just what can be accomplished when you have these organizations working together. Sometimes you don't see it as much as you should. China, $18 billion. Crazy. The cities that you see there are the cities you would think about when you're talking about when you want to hold an event in China, right? Government control and oversight is extensive. If you know anything about China, that shouldn't be anything that you hear that shocks you, right? You expect that they're going to have a lot of control in it. And honestly, controlling the narrative of the event in certain ways. Cannot say that that's not true. Thailand, Korea, again, just realizing that there's a myriad of reasons that people would come to visit you to begin with, and then on top of that, what's another source of travel, and visiting that someone would come for. And I think these events are great ways to showcase a lot of different things, to bring in people that, quite frankly, otherwise may not decide to visit, and now they have a reason and they're exposed to this. And then, of course, what do we want? We want the event to come back, obviously, and then we'd love to see these folks say, oh my gosh, I went there for an event and I've got to go back. It's so beautiful. There's so much more stuff I want to see. That is really the goal. Australia, hosting international events. You see all those cities. The larger cities, typically, there's not really a better word to use, the touristy cities, we build these convention centers. Now, having said that, making sure that they're current, up to date, that can be an investment down the road, because 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you may look at a convention center and say, yeah, that's great, but it's really old and it doesn't have this, this, and this. That's why you see a lot of convention centers in major cities undergoing massively expensive renovations, because they know they have to stay current, because these large events are going to choose other locations because you have an old facility, and it sucks, but that's the nature of the beast. Again, places you would think of: special assistance and rates if you want to go for the U.S. Department of Commerce. And again, some more examples of places you can do. Now, for example, South Africa hosted the World Cup not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So what kind of tie-in events could you do while those were going on, when you have an influx of extra visitors who you might not have normally? Would anyone want to hold their event while this, basically the largest sporting event in the world is going on? And I know Americans go, yeah, we have football while we're talking about everywhere else but America. So, that football. Dubai, I mentioned before. Automobile stuff in Dubai is, if you don't know, just beyond anything. It's really kind of insane. So when you say there's a car show in Dubai, you can bet that it is just unlike anything you've ever seen. And honestly, it's interesting about Abu Dhabi and Dubai, how it wasn't that long ago that, for lack of a better word, they really weren't relevant at all, and they weren't anything, and now they are major event destinations. And it's a credit to them. Brazil, speaking of the Olympics not too long ago, Mexico City, all these different places. So, again, why there? And what's the draw there? And what kind of companies are going to be there? What kind of events are going to be there? These are the questions that you need to ask as an attendee, as a business, as a potential vendor selling a product or service, right? USA, again, you will see that a lot of associations, for profit, okay, and then you see other countries, government controlled, government run, government owned. So it really just kind of depends. And that's not to say that, oh my gosh, you're going to go to this event and be like, ooh, you can tell it's been run by the government. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying it's just how it is, depending on what the event may be. And you may very well feel that way if you've been to something outside there, right? I don't know. Organizing companies, you'll see all over the place. And if it's your first time to go to another country for an event, boy, it's very important that you reach out to these organizations, because, quite frankly, you may know nothing. Oh, events are all the same. Not true. Countries are all the same. Obviously not true. So that may be something you want to investigate further. International meetings and trade fair associations, you can look these up. Again, professional development, training, education, performance standards, all these things from the AIPC, important to know. It's important to understand locally, obviously, right? But then beyond that, nationally and then internationally, what happens and how that works. And you can't network enough in a place you've never been to figure out how you should maintain your event. Well, I've always done it this way. Great. We don't do it that way here. Again, the things that you need to look at for international, like we kind of spoke about a little bit, is, logistical things, support, and how it is, how you can exhibit. You know, if you want to be part of somebody else that's done it before and you want to partner with them and they go, yeah, we know what we're doing. We've been here before. We can help you along the way. We're working with another company trying to get this partnership off the ground. You know, you think about South Florida, I can tell you that one example would be alliances and convention visitors bureaus. We travel all over the world. Large contingent of visitors to the state of Florida, especially South Florida, are international. So it's our job to go there and promote a part of the world they may have never seen as a destination. And so, you know, that had to start as a grassroots thing where nobody done it before. Now it's been done so many times, the relationships are there, we kind of know how it operates. But it had to start, right, and figure out how that was done. You can see these different types of terminology. Germany's example there again. That's if you're going to Germany. I'm not going to sit here and say, you know, it's very important that you know what GmbH is. But it's important if you go to Germany, right? So, you know, and how it's called Congress. So, that, you know, just those different terms, and it's interesting. Similar to what we do, just different names for the same thing, basically. Labor rule differences, right? Setup differences, customs, all these things that you want to bring through. Planning on the time that it may take or the process that it takes to get these. We think that these energy drinks are going to be all the rage overseas because they're all the rage in America. Great. You know, just walk, you know, get on a plane with 75 cases of energy drinks. So that's going to be part of the relationship and part of that process. And understanding how it works and the time involved. Knowing the differences in countries, okay? Americans have this great thing of, if we talk louder and slower, people automatically speak English. That's not the case. So understanding if you're invited to a meal. The customs of eating and drinking and greeting and hellos and making eye contact and shaking hands or not shaking hands, etc., etc. Do you need to be an expert? The honest answer is, I think you need to be well versed. And listen, to take it back a step, not even internationally, knowing your client and your audience just for a meeting in general, this stuff is important. But when you're going somewhere else, and this is again kind of not everybody, but kind of an arrogance with Americans, not everybody's like us. And they're fine with that. So don't expect them to understand or bend to our will, right? We need to understand how they roll. And just a little bit more about how things are different. You know, I'm going to look at that last one about punctuality. So some of you are probably listening to this right now and you're at the same school that I was raised in, which is basically if you're 15 minutes early, you're on time. You may go to another country where it's very common for you to be 10 minutes late. So understanding that I have a relationship with a potential buyer and they say we're going to meet at 5 o'clock at this restaurant to talk terms, and I'm sitting there at 5 o'clock going, oh, I cannot believe these people aren't here yet, and they show up at 10 after, and you've already got it in your mindset that you're feisty about it, and that's completely normal for them, right? And, you know, relationships, why somebody stands behind somebody else, why somebody doesn't speak, why these weird things to us that are perfectly normal to them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It just means understanding relationship building and how that works in different parts of the world. Very important that you understand that. So here are some examples, okay? And just kind of read over those and look at that. And you may sit there and go, I had no idea. That's our point. And, you know, whether you think it's weird, quirky, or anything like that, it doesn't matter. Don't tear up wrapping. It's part of the gift. What do we do with wrapping as soon as we get it in the trash? World etiquette, this is basic stuff and it gets more involved, but I'm sure some of you are reading this and going, I had no idea, and that's kind of the point. So do your research.